The Alchemist is a short story written by H.P Lovecraft in the year 1908, published 8 years later in the magazine known as United Amateur. It should be noted that Howard Lovecraft was 18 years old when he wrote this story, and despite this relatively young age, this story lacks many of the trappings young writers find themselves caught in, and acts as something of a prototype for many of the themes and motifs he would use in later works. Dark family lineages, inexplicable immortals and dark wizards, the crumbling ruins of a decaying aristocracy. Everything just short of the spaceborne entities some of his other stories will feature in later years. The story begins with a description of the protagonist Anton's family home, a once mighty fortress that had never been conquered by its enemies, a historical landmark that had broken the armies of kings and conquerors alike, left to decay as the family's fortunes dried up and died, their aristocratic pride preventing them from joining the upcoming merchant class in France, leaving the sole remaining member of this once great family to wallow in the Middle Ages, while the rest of France marches on into modernity. Anyone who knows the backstory of Howard Lovecraft should find this familiar, as many of his less desirable traits were the product of his father's paranoia being pounded into him from a young age, to distrust those of different races and lower social classes. Meanwhile, their family's old blood money quickly dried up and died before Lovecraft was an adult, contributing to the mental health decline of his father that led to him being institutionalized in an insane asylum. But I digress. Antoine was an orphan raised by his elderly teacher, Pierre. His father died in a strange accident, a piece of the castle's masonry having gotten loose and fallen upon his head. Meanwhile, his mother unfortunately passed during his birth. And on top of not being raised by his parents, Antoine was also socially isolated the majority of his life, kept away from the villagers by Pierre under the pretense of his noble upbringing making him too good to associate with the lower classes. Yet as Pierre grew older and dementia set in, he accidentally let slip the truth that the peasants in the area thought that his family was cursed, because all the men of Anton's familial line died at the age of 32, almost to the day of their birth, including Antoine's father. The curse originating with an ancestor by the name of Henry, the Comte of the family estate during the 13th century. Antoine's ancestor Henry killed a man named Michel Mauvais, an alleged sorcerer and alchemist, a man who allegedly communed with demons and discovered the elixir of life, granting eternal youth to anyone who would consume it. A man often blamed for missing children, though never confronted by the peasants due to his alleged dark powers. Henry had no fear of the man. He was filled with a righteous fury after the disappearance of his own son Godfrey, and in a fit of rage after finding Mauvais standing over a boiling cauldron, strangled the dark alchemist to death, only to later be told that his son Godfrey had been found exploring the abandoned parts of the family estate. But Mauvais was not the only dark alchemist in the area. He had a progeny, a son called Charles Le Sorcier, who declared that no member of the family of C, the familial name redacted in the text itself, would ever live past the current age Henry was, then threw a strange vial into Henry's face, killing him and fleeing into the woods, never to be seen again. As time passed and the curse was forgotten about, the second of the family's patriarchs died on his 32nd birthday. The boy Godfrey, now a man himself, was killed by an arrow while out hunting, eventually followed by his own son Robert, who was found dead in the moat at the age of 32. The idea of this curse drove Antoine to a level of madness, delving into the secrets of demonology and alchemy to try to find a means to break the curse, believing it to have been a spell, only to continually come up with nothing. And eventually, when Pierre died, Antoine was left alone, the sole occupant of a decaying castle, and the last heir of a cursed family. With nothing else to occupy his time in his solitude, Anton began exploring the ruins of his familial estate, eventually discovering a trapdoor in one of the abandoned decaying towers. Beneath that trapdoor he found yet another secret passageway, and was greeted by a bearded stranger, who ranted about alchemical secrets and the elixir of life before attempting to murder Antoine. only for Antoine to accidentally kill the stranger himself with his own vial, and found that the secret passageway under the trapdoor led to a secret entrance into the castle's walls. And with his apparently last breath, the stranger confirms that he himself was Charles Le Sorcier, kept alive and useful by his father's research, and that it was he personally who saw to the death of every single one of Antoine's progenitors. And that, my friends, is a rough summation of the story The Alchemist, and in my opinion a poor summary due to the prose's naturally poetic flow. Whatever you think about Lovecraft the man, he knew how to weave a narrative through prose, breaking the rule of show don't tell by telling and not really showing anything. However, I'm not going to pretend that this is one of Lovecraft's stronger works. The ending of this story feels especially rushed. Charles Le Sorcier is supposed to be immortal, but it's also implied Antoine lives to be 90 after the story. So I guess his elixir of life didn't count towards healing him if he gets lit on fire. The whole thing gets a little shaky by the end. It just all kind of seems to come to a sudden stop. Like Lovecraft hit his word count and just wanted to end things as fast as possible. If you're a huge fan of Lovecraft and want to see his work evolve over time, it's definitely worth it. And in my opinion, just studying the prose of this story is also well worth the read. Just be prepared that the ending is a little bit of a stinker. It just stops. And you could argue that that's a bad habit he sort of fell into as a writer with a lot of his stories. But in my opinion, this is the worst of all of them. Again, not a bad story in and of itself, definitely better than the one he wrote about his cat, but the ending is not strong. And it also leaves me wondering about Charles's motivation, really. I mean, how long can you really hold a grudge? You already took care of the guy who murdered your dad. After living for a few centuries, wouldn't you just get bored of hunting down the same family over and over again? I guess there's an implied level of madness and even a more than filial love between father and son that's implied. But again, it's still a pretty solid story in its own right. The build-up and the mystery is really good. And Lovecraft's greatest strength was always the poetic nature to his prose. I got permission from Ian Gordon of horrorbabbel to add a few bits of his narration to this video that I'll put at the end, and you should be able to find a link to his narration in the comments. If it's not in the pinned comment, let me know and I'll make sure it gets there. I'll definitely make sure that the link is in the description. With that said, I'd like to thank you all for coming by to watch today. If you liked the video, a like and a comment helps it get boosted a lot in the algorithm. Anyway, you guys have a good one, you hear? Or else.
For centuries, its lofty battlements have frowned down upon the wild and rugged countryside about, serving as a home and stronghold for the proud house whose honoured line is older even than the moss-grown castle walls. These ancient turrets, stained by the storms of generations and crumbling under the slow yet mighty pressure of time, formed in the ages of feudalism one of the most dreaded and formidable fortresses in all France. From its machicolated parapets and mounted battlements, barons, counts, and even kings have been defied, yet never had its spacious halls resounded to the footsteps of the invader.